Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. Let's do it. Let's get to it. Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. It is Wednesday, November 1st. I'm your host, Jon June. And it is a solo pod today. No Greg Penniman, but if you're watching live on the Fantasy Football Diagnostics YouTube channel or the X page or on the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Twitch, definitely appreciate you. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or Spotify, equally appreciate you. Just make sure whatever platform you are consuming this wonderful content on, that you are liking, commenting, subscribing, all of the above, because it helps the show out. And if you're watching live, definitely jump in the chat. Definitely, would love to interact with folks here. So, yeah, man, without further ado, it's our week 9 preview. Obviously, we got to start with, we got to talk about Thursday Night Football. It was the Pittsburgh Steelers and take on the Tennessee Titans. Then we're going to break down streams of the week, as well as get into the 1 p.m. games, or the early games, I should say, for the slated games on Sunday. So without further ado, let's kind of jump into the news. And there was big news that broke over the, I guess last night, where the Las Vegas Raiders, almost said Oakland, but the Las Vegas Raiders fired head coach Josh McDaniels and the GM as well, the general manager there, whose name escapes me at the moment. But they fired them. They also fired the offensive coordinator, Antonio Pierce, former player, former Giants linebacker. He has since been promoted to the interim head coach. So we'll see how that, what downstream impact that has. But we've already seen a change of the guard in terms of personnel, as Jimmy Garoppolo has officially been benched, and the Raiders are going with rookie Aiden O'Connell. So in terms of what this means for the Raiders as a whole, they're looking for their third head coach in 3 years. They fired John Gruden 2 years ago before hiring Josh McDaniels, and now they're looking for a new head coach there. So genuinely curious to see what direction they end up going in. They probably won't hire a head coach until the regular season is pretty much over. Assuming they don't go the college route there, but in terms of the here and the now. I think people are wondering what can we do with our Raiders pieces? Like, what does this mean? And I'm just going to, think about this out loud here, right? You've got a defensive-minded head coach, right? Former NFL linebacker, Antonio Pierce. So we've got a defensive-minded head coach. And I feel like this is going to lead, especially with the rookie quarterback here, I feel like this is just going to lead to a more conservative play calling. We'll probably see, pretty, significant usage out of the run game. I know Josh Jacobs has been getting his touches, but I think, you'll see a re-emphasis on the run game, play action, and getting those opportunities to Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers. So what does this do with Devontae Adams? I almost want to say that you could buy Devontae Adams, right? Like, this is probably the lowest his value could be, right? Coming off that horrific Monday night game, 7 targets, 1 catch for 11 yards. He was clearly frustrated, visibly frustrated on the sideline. So in regards to, where it goes from here for him, like, I feel like Aiden O'Connell is going to come in, probably hyper target Devontae Adams, rightfully so. Obviously target Jacoby Myers. Maybe they get Michael Mayer involved. But from a fantasy perspective, I mean, we obviously know the talent that Devontae is, right? It just needs a quarterback that's going to consistently get him the ball. Jimmy G missed on some really bad throws in Monday's game, so that's definitely something that is was of concern going forward if they were going to continue going with Jimmy G. But Aiden O'Connell hasn't looked particularly great in his opportunities as well. So it really makes you wonder how much improvement or how much better it could get for Devontae Adams. That being said, I mean, what's the worst that could happen, right? Like if the Devontae Adams manager is so frustrated and they see Aiden O'Connell as the move to Aiden O'Connell as a bad thing, maybe it's worth flipping, a Gus Edwards, right, to go get a Devontae Adams if that's something that could happen, right? Now, if I have Devontae Adams, I'm holding. I'm not gonna sell low on Devontae Adams unless there's a deal that makes sense for both sides. But as far as I can tell, I'm not gonna sell at this moment in redraft leagues. Um, Now, the dynasty conversation gets a little bit interesting. I mean, Devontae Adams probably not long for the Raiders. Uh, there's speculation that he could be traded to the New York Jets next year. So uh, definitely don't anticipate Devontae Adams being a Raider for much longer. But enough about the Raiders. Let's get into Thursday Night Football and discuss our Thursday Night Football preview, as we have the 3-4 Tennessee Titans traveling to Pittsburgh to take on the 4-3 Pittsburgh Steelers. This game has a 36.5 point total. The Pittsburgh Steelers are 2.5 point favorites here at home. I'm going to take the under here. I'm going to take Pittsburgh to cover and Pittsburgh to win this game. I mean, boy, what a debut it was for Will Levis. 4 passing touchdowns. People are, I think, starting. I mean, it's funny, right? Because Will Levis, I think, got killed in the pre-draft process. And he comes out on Sunday and looks, I think, better than a lot of people thought. I think even better than Will Levis supporters would have even thought that he could have looked in his first game action. So I don't think history repeats itself, or I don't think, he's able to replicate that success against a Pittsburgh defense that, is known to give veteran quarterbacks trouble. That defensive front is definitely a menace between T.J. Watt and Alex Highsmith, and even Nick Herbig is coming off the edge making plays as well. So that's definitely something that would give me some pause about Will Levis in this matchup here. But definitely not starting him in one quarterback leagues. I think in 2 quarterback leagues, he's a QB2. Definitely don't see anything wrong with that. In terms of the remainder of the Tennessee Titans, Derrick Henry, I think he's an RB1. I mean, we saw his usage go up last week. I mean, turns out Tajay Spears is dealing with some sort of injury, so don't know if that had something to do with it, or if the fact that they were in really positive game script had something to do with it as well. But I'm willing to throw Derrick Henry out against this Pittsburgh defense, who, all in all this year, they have not been great against the pass. Pittsburgh, or against the run rather. Pittsburgh on their last 3 games, allows the 14th most PPR points to running backs. So makes me think Derrick Henry's in a nice spot here. So I'm definitely willing to put him down as an RB1 and expect that RB1 production from him. Looking at D-Hop, obviously he was the main beneficiary of Will Levis's 4 touchdown performance, as he caught 3 touchdown passes on 4 receptions. Obviously don't think he replicates that in this matchup, but I'm definitely willing to continue to throw D-Hop out there as a wide receiver too, especially if Will Levis is going to look to him as his main option. Now, the Tennessee pass offense, while Will Levis did have really good first game and, did throw 4 touchdown passes. Their pass rate did not, it didn't significantly rise in this game. So I still think it's the same ball control offense. I don't think the targets are going to get significantly higher. I mean, again, he only had 4 receptions. Would have to go back and see what that target number was for D Hop. But, I don't think that it's going to go to a place where, we're suddenly going to get, Will Levis isn't going to drop back 30, 35 times a game, leading to, 6 or 7, 8 targets a game uh, for DeAndre Hopkins. In that last game, he had 6 targets, so still pretty good there. But again, I'm just gonna temper my expectations. Like I said on the recap show back on Monday, I need to see Will Levis do it again, right? Um, so I think that's really it on the on the Tennessee side. Moving on to the Pittsburgh side, I think it starts with the receivers there. George Pickens, Deontay Johnson. I think they're both wide receiver twos with some wide receiver one upside in this matchup. Tennessee allows the 14th most PPR points to the wide receiver position. So they're both in a decent spot here. And, we've talked about this before on this show, but Deontay is probably going to continue to see, the bulk of the targets here, work the short to intermediate area of the field, while Pickens will continue to be that downfield option, which is going to lead to a lot more volatility here and is going to also lead to a lot of big plays for George Pickens, but some weeks where, like we saw last week, granted he did catch a touchdown, but it wasn't, a very big week by any means. So continue to roll those guys out there as wide receiver twos with some wide receiver one upside. I do in the backfield here, Najee Harris, Jalen Warren. I think they're both playable as RB3s with some RB2 upside. I mean, Tennessee is beatable on the ground. They allow the 11th most PPR points to the running back position over their last 3 games. So I'm comfortable throwing both these guys out there in a pinch. We do have, what is it? 4 teams on bye this week: the Denver Broncos, the Detroit Lions, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the San Francisco 49ers. So some pretty, we got some pretty big running backs in there with CMC and CMC is McCaffrey. CMC obviously Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, and then Javonte Williams, who had his best game of the season last week. So with those guys being out, I think Jalen Warren is definitely a guy that is playable. Najee Harris, I know that people drafted him relatively highly. So I think you're going to continue to roll him out there as well. Don't have any interest in a tight end in this game. I think Kenny Pickett, I guess we talked about him on Monday. There was not a lot of optimism that he was going to play and be available for this game. Turns out that he actually is. That guy's, I mean, he's tough, man. I mean, there's like 2 weeks in a row now where they're like, yeah, he's not going to play. He's not going to play. And then, he comes out and actually plays. So definitely kudos to him, but I'm not putting him in my fantasy lineup. I mean, especially with a rib injury. I mean, he's, a hit away from being knocked out of this game here. So it's definitely a risky play here and not one that comes with a ton of upside, as Tennessee allows the 20th most PPR points to the quarterback position. So, it was, at best, he's a QB2, I think, in this matchup. Moving on to the bold predictions here. And I'll be honest, guys, I mean, this is not a game that I particularly love, and there was not a lot of props in here that I particularly felt strong about. But I landed on a couple here that I'm willing to parlay. And so, we'll see where it goes from here. But number one is Deontay Johnson, over 4.5 receptions. That's the prop right now. That is minus 154. And then George Pickens over 53.5 receiving yards. That is minus 114. Parlay those together. That is plus 217. So that is where I stand there. And I guess that's kind of breaking news. Josh Allen did not practice today with a shoulder injury. Definitely feel like he will play in this week. So I did just get that across the X app. So um, something to monitor throughout the week. But I think that's all I have on this game here. Again, not an overly not expecting a lot of points out of this game, not a ton of fantasy production out of this game. Um, I'm just kind of excited to see Will Levis play here and see if he can repeat his performance from last week. Moving on to streams of the week, and my quarterback stream of the week this week is gonna be Baker Mayfield. He's 37% rostered in Yahoo leagues at this current moment. Gets to go up against Houston this week. Baker's currently the quarterback 17, averaging about 16 points per game, which is not bad at all. And he gets matched up against Houston here, who allow the second most fantasy points to the quarterback position over their last 3 games. So again, quite a few teams on bye here. I'm very high on Baker Mayfield this week. Almost didn't list him down here because I was potentially going to make him my start of the week. But I felt like, a guy like Baker Mayfield, who's not overly highly rostered, he's a guy that I felt like I needed to shed some light on as early as possible in the week. And coming to find out, while Greg is not here, he did submit some streams of the week. Baker Mayfield also his stream of the week. So we both, feel very strongly about this one and love this matchup here against Houston. Moving on to my tight end stream of the week, and that is Cade Otton, going with the stack here. And I hate to have to go to Cade Otton sometimes, but I'm just looking at the matchups here. I'm looking at, I obviously like Baker Mayfield. Cade Otton is going up against Baltimore, who over their last 3 matchups allow the eighth most. Or sorry, he's not going up against Baltimore. He's going up against Houston. My fault, guys. Over their last 3 games, Houston allows the 6th most PPR points to the tight end position. Again, Cade Otton it's been hit or miss with him. I think you're really banking on him catching like 3-4 passes for about 40 to 50 yards. Hopefully he sneaks in the end zone here. But just going with, again, obviously like Baker Mayfield a lot. He's a tight end. He's seeing a 12% target share, and he's in a pretty good matchup here. So I not the most confident in Cade Otton this week. There's a few guys out there, but tight end's a mess right now. So if you're really in a pinch, he's the guy that I would probably look to in that instance. And Greg's stream of the week in this week, can't believe he's not over 50%, but it's Trey McBride. Obviously coming off the big week that he had, I think that Trey McBride needs to be rostered. I mean, honestly, I would consider, even if you had another tight end, that you could pick up Trey McBride. And if you felt comfortable maybe trading the tight end you have, or if McBride continues to to produce in the manner that he has been, or maybe you could flip McBride to help you out at another position here. So definitely like that. And then my defensive stream of the week, I actually picked this one before the news hit last night, but I'm going with the Giants defense, the New York Giants going up against the Las Vegas Raiders. I mean, Jimmy G was a mess on Monday. The Giants defense has been pretty strong over their last 3 games. I mean, you look at their matchups against the Jets and Washington and Buffalo as well. They've been pretty solid. I think they've only allowed 28 offensive points, or 28 points off touchdowns in those 3 games combined. So definitely a stark contrast from where they were at the beginning of the season. So I definitely like this one here as a defense that's, again, widely available, only 10% rostered. So definitely think that, they should be available in your league. And coincidentally enough, that is also Greg's stream of the week here. So typically when Greg and I double up on something, it turns out to be pretty good. So Giants defense and Baker Mayfield we're doubled up on this week. So I think you definitely got to like those options. Moving on to the next segment here, starting some breakdowns of some of these games. And we got a Germany game this week. The 6-2 Miami Dolphins travel to Germany to take on the 6-2 Kansas City Chiefs, who are also in Germany, where this game has a 50.5-point total, and the Kansas City Chiefs are 2.5-point favorites. In terms of this game here, I will take the over. I will take Kansas City to cover. I will also take Kansas City to win this matchup here. In terms of the fantasy output, Tyreek and Waddle, I think they're wide receiver ones at their respective positions. Kansas City's defense has been strong throughout the year. They don't give up a ton of points to the wide receiver position over their last 3 weeks, especially. But I think these Dolphins wide receivers are too explosive. This Dolphins offense is too explosive. You've got a game with a 50.5-point total, which, if I'm not mistaken, might be the highest total on the week. So you definitely got to throw these guys out there, and you definitely want a piece of this game if you can get it. Raheem Mostert, he's going to be an RB1 for me this week. Again, Kansas City been very strong defensively all year. I'll just read out some of their rankings over their last 3 games. 31st against quarterbacks, 15th against running backs, 28th against receivers, and 30th against tight ends over their last 3 matchups. So the running back position is probably where they're weakest, and Raheem Mostert is obviously he's been very strong throughout the year. So I think he's a solid RB1 in this matchup as well. Tua Tagovailoa, I just read that Kansas City is 31st against quarterbacks over their last 3 games, but we saw Russell Wilson have a decent game here against the Kansas City Chiefs. And so I'm anticipating, obviously this game being a high total. I'm not really afraid of some of these matchups when it comes to this Miami offense because of how creative they are and how explosive they can be. So when it comes to that, I'm willing to throw Tua out there as a QB1. So I have him projection-wise ranked as projection-wise, he's a high-end QB2, but I think when it's all said and done, my rankings will reflect that he is a QB1 this week. On the Kansas City side, again, really easy when you get to the Kansas City side because Mahomes is a QB1. Travis Kelce, definitely a tight end one. And then Isaiah Pacheco, I think this week probably fits in as an RB2. The Miami Dolphins allow the 31st most PPR points to the running back position over their last 3 matchups. So Pacheco in a tougher spot, but again, in a game with such a high total, so many points potentially being scored, and you're tied to a Patrick Mahomes-led offense coming off of a loss, I definitely will we'll have Pacheco in my lineups regardless of what these rankings say. And then Rashee Rice, I think continue to throw him out there as a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 or 2. Again, he's catching passes from Patrick Mahomes. That's got to make him, worthy of our attention here. So regardless of what the matchup looks like, Miami's a pretty good matchup. They're ninth most allow the ninth most PPR points to the wide receiver position over their last 3 games. Ninth most. So definitely would like to throw Rashee Rice out there as a wide receiver 3 with some strong wide receiver 2 upside. But this should be an exciting game. 9:30 in the morning here. So start, I guess, have a nice cool beverage early, or you could have your coffee, maybe a little something in it. But yeah, man, so we'll see what happens. Excited for this matchup. And before we move on to our next matchup, my man Dylan is in here. What's up, my man? Just made a trade. You like ? redraft, full PPR. Diggs, Ford, Goddard, for ETN, Hawkinson, and Smith. My depth is CMC, Ford, Roshan, DeMarcado, Singletary, Herbert. I'm assuming that's Khalil Herbert. And then Diggs, Ayuk, Waddle, Flowers, and Shaheed. So you gave up Diggs and you gave up Jerome Ford and you gave up Dallas Goddard to acquire Travis Etienne. So you went from Ford to Etienne. I like that. Goddard to Hawkinson. I like that. I mean, assuming that I don't think it really matters who takes over this role, but I think we would like to see, Josh Dobbs was traded from the Vikings or from the Cardinals to the Vikings. We know that he hyper targeted the tight end position. I mean, the Arizona Cardinals led the league in tight end targets. Was that a function of the offense or was that a function of Josh Dobbs and, his comfortability with the receivers? I guess we'll find out. But TJ Hawkinson, obviously Jordan Addison's been getting a lot of love. But when you look at the target share numbers, you look at this offense, it has been going through TJ Hawkinson, with the absence of Justin Jefferson. Now, potentially, are you buying high right now on Hawkinson? It's possible, right? Because if the rumors are true and Justin Jefferson is coming back week 10, week 11, maybe you're not going to get that same usage that we've seen Hawkinson getting over these last few weeks. But now you add Devontae Smith into the mix, you are downgrading from Diggs to Smith, right? So I think moving from Ford to ETN makes that downgrade worth it, in my opinion. So all in all, I think it's a good trade for both sides. I think the manager who took on Diggs and took on Ford gave up ETN, who you bought ETN during a bye week, so that probably also helps. Maybe that manager is maybe that manager is in need of some help, immediate help, and Diggs and Ford provide that this week. And then obviously, Goddard and Devontae Smith go on bye weeks next week, but I don't think that really impacts, this trade right here. Let's see, Dylan adding some context here. Also, there was this other trade made in my league, Puka and Burrow for Olave and Hurts. Who do you think wins that? I mean, give me the Olave and Hurts side. I mean, I think I want Hurts over Burrow. If Olave, I think right in that side, in a trade like that, right, like you got to tell yourself the story. Like, what if Olave starts, what if him and Derek Carr start connecting on these deep targets, right? So I think, when you tell yourself that, it's easy to buy into a Chris Olave. Puka Nacua banged up. I think he's going to continue to be banged up. I mean, just the role that he plays, going across the middle, taking huge shots. I think that he'll continue to face things like that. But Olave, has struggled, and I wasn't very high on Olave coming into the year. But it seems like every week there's a buy low article or someone tweeting out buy low on Chris Olave, and every week it doesn't work. But obviously, process over results here. So yeah, give me the Olave Hurt side. Dylan saying need an RB2, and I feel like I got that with ETN. Bigger gap between Ford and ETN than Diggs and Devontae Smith. Yeah, I mean, I could agree with that to an extent. I mean, Ford doesn't have the upside that ETN has. Devontae does have, I think, Devontae has a decent amount of upside, probably not to the level that Diggs has, but Diggs has a secured role week in and week out, right? He's going to see a 30+% target share every week. Devontae is just not going to see that. But, like you said, you got you solidified your RB2, and I think CMC and ETN is a deadly combination to have. So, I definitely like this trade for you, Dylan. And then Clayton Olaf saying 12-man, half PPR currently, 7-1. League mate offered me James Cook and Ayuk for Joe Mixon. Thoughts? I would do that deal. Yeah, I think I would do that deal. Ayuk is obviously like he's been productive. He's on a bye week right now too. But I'm assuming you're thinking about it because you're kind of hurting at receiver. James Cook, I think people are worried and concerned about his role with Leonard Fournette having signed with the Buffalo Bills. So that could be an overreaction, on a lot of people's part, like particularly this league mate here, trying to sell on James Cook. But Joe Mixon, he's been basically an RB2 all year. James Cook is like an RB2 that sits on like RB3. It's a half PPR, so maybe that would make me less inclined to want to do this, just because Joe Mixon is going to have that touchdown upside where James Cook, like, the Bills get the ball inside the 5-yard line, and I don't ever see a scenario where they hand the ball to James Cook. So you're really hoping he scores from outside the 20s. And then Brandon Ayuk is, obviously you guys know how I feel about Brandon Ayuk. And the year that he's having, he's been really good. In half PPR leagues, let me just check where he's currently at in points per game. In half PPR, Brandon Ayuk is the wide receiver 16. So, in points per game. So wide receiver 16 versus Joe Mixon, who is the running back 24, and James Cook, the running back 25. So they're back-to-back essentially in half PPR leagues and half PPR scoring. So, yeah, I think this is a deal I would make. Clayton, I think this is a deal I would make. All right. Again, if you guys have more questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Whether you're watching on YouTube or you're watching on X or you're watching on Twitch, we'll be more than happy to take those on. But let's move on to this next matchup here. We've got the 3-5 Los Angeles Rams traveling to Green Bay, Lambeau Field, to take on the 2-5 Green Bay Packers, where this game has a 39.5 point total, and the Green Bay Packers are 3-point favorites here. I'm going to take the under here. I'm going to take the Green Bay Packers to cover. I'm going to take the Green Bay Packers to win. The Rams are dealing with an injury situation. Matthew Stafford dealing with the right thumb. Don't know how long exactly he'll be out. So Brett Rypien is going to make a start here. Brett Rypien, not very good. Sean McVay, he's very good. So you're hoping that McVay can at least help uplift a little bit or offset some of, what makes Brett Rypien so bad. And so from a perspective of the Rams here, you were going to play Cooper. You're going to play Cooper Kupp. You're going to play Puka Nacua. I think those guys are in play as wide receiver 2s. Mid-tier wide receiver 2s, probably Kupp, closer to a wide receiver 1, while Puka is probably going to be about wide receiver 17, 18. And then Darrell Henderson, I think he's in play as an RB3. But that's about as far as I'm going with the LA Rams offense. In regards to the Green Bay Packers, I think Jordan Love definitely has some QB1 upside. Christian Watson, I think he's a wide receiver 3. I also think Jaden Reed is also a wide receiver 3 as well. We saw Reed lead the Packers in routes run last week. So that could have been indicative of a bigger role here for him, potentially a takeover as the top option in this offense. Could be a little hot takey. Christian Watson definitely a freak, but from a prospect perspective, right? Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, Jaden Reed. And when I evaluated them through my prospect model specifically for wide receivers, Jaden Reed graded out better than both Watson and Romeo Doubs here. So From a talent level perspective, I do think Jaden Reed is the most talented, and so I definitely don't. I never foresaw I never foresaw a situation where he would overtake these guys this year. But if he's already showing that, I think he's somebody that at least needs, at a minimum, needs to be rostered. And then you know, but I think he has some wide receiver three potential in this matchup against the Rams, who on the season allow the seventh most PPR points to the wide receiver position. So definitely somebody I would be I would not be hesitant to find a way to put him in my lineup as a wide receiver three or flex. So again, I'm not going overboard here and starting him over Puka Nakua or anything like that. But if you need a wide receiver three or you need a flex play, I think Jaden Reed could definitely help you out. In terms of the running game here, Aaron Jones is an RB2. Don't know how confident I feel about that one. AJ Dillon, was pretty pesky last week in terms of the opportunities and the touches. But I think I'm willing to think that it's still health related there with Aaron Jones, and I think AJ Dillon will, continue to have a role. But I feel like Aaron Jones will be the will be the lead running back here, which will lead to some RB2 production, and then AJ Dillon will be an RB3. Moving on to this next matchup, we've got the 3-4 Tampa Bay Buccaneers traveling to Houston to take on the 3-4 Houston Texans, where this game has a 40-point total, and the Houston Texans are 3-point favorites at home. In this game here, I'm going to take the over. I will take Tampa Bay to cover. I will also take Tampa Bay to win this game here. Again, obviously on the Tampa Bay side, I talked about Baker. I think he's in a great spot here. I think he's definite QB1 in this matchup here against Houston. And obviously that appeal brings some appeal here with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, who I think are wide receiver twos in this matchup here against Houston, who, Houston allows the 16th most PPR points to the wide receiver position. We saw, Adam Thielen have a nice game last week. Even Bryce Young, as a passer, had a decent game last week as well. So definitely like those guys. Rachaad White, I think he's an RB2 in this matchup here. Houston allows the 24th most PPR points to the position. But I think that, his involvement as well as, involvement as a runner as well as in the pass game could definitely help him get to some RB2 value. And then K-Dot in my stream of the week, like I mentioned, has some stream appeal here in this matchup. On the Houston Texans side, CJ Stroud, definitely a QB1 for me this week. I mean, it's been a rough last two outings here for CJ Stroud, as obviously I think he was my start of the week both of those times, and before the bye week and last week, and has not come back with some strong performances here. So hopefully he can bounce back this week. And this Tampa Bay pass defense is a defense that I think could allow him to do that. They allow the third most fantasy points to the quarterback position over their last three matchups. So I think this is a nice spot here for Stroud, as well as his weapons in Nico Collins and Tank Dell. I think Nico Collins probably a strong wide receiver too. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers allow the 8th most PPR points to the wide receiver position. So definitely feel like he's in a strong spot here for a bounce back week. And Tank Dell, who disappointed last week, I think he's also in a nice spot here to finish as a wide receiver 3. In the continuing with the pass game, Dalton Schultz, I think he's a tight end 1 in this matchup. I mean, did not have a strong week last week. Almost came back down to earth from what we had previously seen from him in some strong performances. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers allow the 10th most PPR points to the tight end position. So I definitely feel like this is a nice spot here. And I think I misspoke earlier. I said I said the wide receiver Tampa Bay allows the 8th most PPR points to the wide receiver position. They actually allow the 3rd most PPR points to the wide receiver position. So strong matchup for the wide receivers here on the Houston side. Moving on to the run game, Dameon Pierce didn't practice today, so that's definitely concerning. He was, I believe it was an even split last week with Devin Singletary. It was either even or Devin Singletary, just slightly out carried him. Um, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are a strong run defense. They allow the 32nd most PPR points to the running back position over their last 3 matchups. So Dameon Pierce, not in a great spot. Probably not worth playing in this matchup. And I don't think Devin Singletary would be either. So, I think you could find better options here, with these two guys. Moving on to this next game here, we've got the 3-5 Washington Commanders traveling to New England to take on the 2-6 New England Patriots, where this game has a 40.5 point total, and the New England Patriots are 3-point favorites at home here. Now, I was very, very tempted to take, well, I'm going to take the under here, but I was very, very tempted to take the New England Patriots to cover and win this game. But for some reason, man, I kept selecting them, and I go back and I change it, and I change it again. And I go back, I change it to the Commanders, and I change it back to New England. And I said, you know what? Nah, man, I'm gonna go with Washington here. Washington played Philadelphia so hard last week. They should have won that game. They could have won that game. New England, played a tough one too against Miami in a game that they could have won as well. They are at home here, so that gives them the advantage. But I just feel like this isn't the same New England Patriots. And while I have picked them to cover in their last 2 games, their last 3 or 4 games, don't foresee that happening this week in this matchup. I just think they're just too up against it here in terms of Mac Jones isn't playing his best football. Their offensive line is dealing with a lot of stuff as well. They just lost Kendrick Bourne, who's probably their best receiver. Juju Smith-Schuster washed. It's definitely tough sledding here for the New England Patriots. But with Washington Commanders, they're in sell mode as well, right? We saw them ship off 2 of their 2 star edge rushers and Chase Young to the San Francisco 49ers for a 3rd round pick, and then Montez Sweat to the Bears for a 2nd round pick. So makes me think that this defense is probably going to struggle a little bit. But again, the New England offense is not one that I think is one that really inspires any fear into defenses, opposing defenses here. So that being said, I think Ramondre is an RB2, Zeke is an RB3, Demario Pop Douglas, a wide receiver 3. On the Washington side, I think Sam Howell sneaks into QB1 territory. I think Terry McLaurin is a wide receiver 1. I think Brian Robinson, a high-end running back 2, and then Jahan Dotson, who made an impact last week. I think he comes back this week as a wide receiver 3, and Logan Thomas is definitely in play as a tight end 1. Moving on to the next matchup, we've got the 2-6 Chicago Bears traveling to New Orleans to take on the 4-4 New Orleans Saints. This game has a 41 point total, where the New Orleans Saints are 7.5 point home favorites. I'm going to go with the under here. I'm going to go with New Orleans Saints to cover. I'm also going to go with the New Orleans Saints to win this game. In terms of this matchup here, I think DJ Moore, he's a wide receiver 2. Justin Fields still not practicing, so Tyson Badgett expected to get another start here at least. And so again, has not been very productive over these last few weeks for DJ Moore. Understandably playing with a backup quarterback, so that's going to definitely impact that as well. But I think a wide receiver 2 is what he'll continue to be with Justin Fields missing time. I think Deontay Foreman, he's an RB2. We saw Roshan Johnson be involved last week, actually led them in snaps. I feel like that a lot of that had to do, obviously, with the game script, which I think we're going to continue to see some negative game script here. So maybe that'll probably make me lean Foreman closer to being an RB3, with Roshan also being an RB3. But Roshan potentially could leapfrog Foreman here as he is the primary pass catching running back. Cole Kmet, I think, it's been tough, man. It really has been. I think he truly misses um, Justin Fields. The matchup here is good. The New Orleans Saints allow the ninth most PPR points to the tight end position. So it's in theory you could throw Cole Kmet out there, but again, these last few weeks have not been strong for him. Has a 15% target share over the last 3 games, so still, relatively good for a tight end here, but again, not just don't have a lot of confidence in the situation, without Justin Fields. Moving on to New Orleans, I think Derek Carr is in a really good spot here as a QB1. The Chicago Bears allow the 24th most PPR points to the quarterback position. So obviously not over their last 3 games. So that's not particularly great. We saw Justin Herbert, what he was able to do, his Greg start of the week last week. And we know the Bears have been a bad defense before that. They did get stronger on the front seven with the addition of Montez Sweat. So maybe that downgrades, Derek Carr just a little bit. But I'm still willing to throw him out there as basically a borderline QB1. I think Kamara continues to be an RB1, especially in PPR leagues. I mean, he's going to continue to be a top 3 option, especially if he keeps being hyper targeted by Derek Carr. Chris Olave, I think he is a wide receiver 1. We talked about him a little bit earlier. He's a guy that is constantly thrown around as a buy low candidate. I think, it's not talent is not the question. Opportunity is not the question. It's more about, just being able to realize those opportunities here with Olave. So I think you continue to roll him out there in a matchup against, the Chicago Bears, which allow the 11th most PPR points to the position over the last 3 games here. So definitely feel like Olave is in a nice spot here, but, there's obviously going to be some volatility that comes with that. Speaking of volatility, Rashid Shaheed, volatile wide receiver 3. Michael Thomas, I think he's a floor play wide receiver 3. I mean, Rashid Shaheed obviously had the big week last week, 3 catches, 153 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Absolutely absurd what he was able to do, but he can't live off that kind of efficiency here. So definitely, something to keep an eye on for sure. But if you're in a pinch, you need, you're a huge underdog, you need some big plays, or you just need, a nitro button in your flex. I think Rashid Shaheed provides that. But Michael Thomas, I think, continues to be a floor play wide receiver 3. Moving on to this next game here, we've got the 4-4 Minnesota Vikings traveling to Atlanta to take on the 4-4 Atlanta Falcons, where this game has a 37.5 point total. I'm going to take, or the Atlanta Falcons are 4.5 point favorites. I will take the over here. I will take, Minnesota to cover this game. I'll take Atlanta to win. I think Drake London is a wide receiver 3 if he can go. Did not practice today. Sorry about that, guys. Did not practice today, so that's concerning. But we did get some news that Taylor Heineke will start. So that's good news for Atlanta pass catchers. So Drake London included. Bijan Robinson, I think, is an RB2 this week. Kyle Pitts probably could be in tight end 1 range with Heineke here. For Minnesota, Jaron Hall is getting the start with Kirk Cousins out for the year. Josh Dobbs is expected to be his backup. So I think Addison and Hawkinson are the best shots to take, with Addison being a wide receiver 3 and TJ Hawkinson being a tight end 1, with Alexander Madison probably being an RB3. Moving on to this next matchup, we've got the 1-7 Arizona Cardinals traveling to Cleveland to take on the 4-3 Cleveland Browns. This game has a 37.5 point total, where the Cleveland Browns are 7.5 point favorites at home. I'm taking the under here, taking Cleveland to cover, taking Cleveland to win. I think Trey McBride, tight end 1 for Arizona. Amari DiMarcado, probably an RB3. Again, Clayton Tune is starting, so I'm not really overly excited about any of these options here for Arizona going up against a tough Cleveland Browns defense. Don't want to go in the teeth of that Cleveland defense. On the Cleveland side, I think Jerome Ford, strong RB1, potentially. I think Amari Cooper, a wide receiver 3, David Njoku, a tight end 1 option, and Kareem Hunt is an RB2. Deshaun Watson did practice today. Not sure if he's going to play, but at this point, I don't know if it really even matters. Moving on to the last and final matchup we'll cover today. The 5-2 Seattle Seahawks traveling to Baltimore to take on the 6-2 Baltimore Ravens, where this game has a 42.5-point total, and the Baltimore Ravens are 5.5-point favorites at home. I will take the over. I'll take Seattle to cover. I'll take Baltimore to win this game. Lamar is a QB1. Mark Andrews is a tight end 1. Gus Edwards is an RB2 or 3 potentially, borderline. And then Zay Flowers is a wide receiver 3 in this matchup. On the Seattle side, I think Kenneth Walker is an RB1. Zach Charbonnet continues to be a stash. Geno Smith, probably a QB2 in a tough matchup here. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are probably high-end wide receiver 3s, again, in a tough matchup. And then that is it. I will take one last question here from George Playo 1. Should drop Quentin Johnston for Demario Douglas? Yes. Quentin Johnston's playing the New York Jets. That's a tough matchup, not one that you particularly want to play him in. I would drop him, pick up Demario Douglas, and if your platform allows you, Quentin Johnston doesn't play until Monday night, so you could drop one of your players who've already played and go ahead and pick up Quentin Johnston in the event that he does do something crazy or you want to utilize him for the week after. But that is all, folks. That's all we got for today. So thank you for joining. Thank you for listening. We appreciate y'all. Have a good one, and we're out of here. Peace.